Nate and I are currently working on a book, and the idea for the book is to take four modern philosophers, Byung-Chul Han, Slavoj Žižek, Heidegger, and Hegel, and to read them from an Orthodox Christian perspective, to take their insights and see where they can be fit in with an Orthodox Christian worldview. We haven't really established what the title is going to be, but that is the idea for the book, which hopefully will be out by November of this year. Now, the first chapter we've been working on is the Žižek one, and that is because we've obviously done a lot of work in the past on Žižek, analyzing his philosophy and also analyzing where it fits in with Orthodox Christianity. One of our most viewed videos to date is the Orthodox Christian analysis of Žižek. Another one of our most viewed videos is the analysis of Norm Macdonald and his appearance on The View from a Žižekian perspective. Now, today I want to make another video like that where I analyze Norm Macdonald from the perspective of Žižek. This time around, I want to take a look at Norm's famous tweet reply to Neil deGrasse Tyson. So Neil deGrasse Tyson tweeted out, "The universe is blind to our sorrows and indifferent to our pains. Have a nice day." And then Norm replied with, "Neil, there is a logic flaw in your little aphorism that seems quite telling. Since you and I are part of the universe, then we would also be indifferent and uncaring. Perhaps you forgot, Neil, that we are not superior to the universe, but merely a fraction of it. Nice day indeed." I really love Norm's tweet here, and one of the reasons why is that it is profoundly Žižekian. And now I want to transition to talk about the Žižekian understanding of the subject and how the subject fits into reality. Because, as Norm said, we are not superior to the universe, but we're actually part of the universe. You could even say we're inscribed into reality itself. And this is a profoundly Žižekian point. This is something that Žižek really emphasized back in 2016 to 2018 when he was debating with the object-oriented ontology guys who were, according to Žižek, didn't really have a true understanding of the subject and the significance of the subject. Now, for Žižek, the subject isn't this being that is divided from the world in the naive sense that you have the subject here and subjective experience here, and then you have objective reality here. This understanding is what he would call, or what has been called, the transcendental circle or transcendental correlationism, where you can only have access to objective reality over here from the perspective of a subject. So you never actually are able to access objective reality, even if you believe that it's there, but you only have access to that reality as you subjectively experience it. So there's a correlational circle here that you cannot step behind to truly access objective reality, to truly access what is real. Now, for Žižek, this problem is based on a naive understanding of the subject, where the subject is somehow divided from objective reality. But what Žižek wants to do is inscribe subjectivity into objective reality itself. And then the possibility of truly attaining some sort of objective perspective of reality becomes more clear here. And it's not just due to the fact that the subject is divided from reality, but precisely because the subject is inscribed into reality. So, to quote him, he says, "We do not reach the in itself by way of tearing away subjective appearances and trying to isolate objective reality as it is out there, independently of the subject. The in itself inscribes itself precisely into the subjective excess, gap, inconsistency that opens up a hole in reality." So what Žižek's saying here is that the in itself is already present, and we are the in itself. The subject is the in itself. Now, we're not talking about the subject as my, what he would say, the content of my experience, my psychological personality, or even my subjective representation of reality. He's talking about the subject qua void, the subject as the abyss of pure identity, of what he calls the inhuman, monstrous entity, which is the subject and the object A, and the subject and object A for him is the same thing. The object A is the subject as inscribed into the world of objects. So what Žižek is saying here is that you have the world of objects, and it's not that the subject is outside the world of objects. This would actually be a non-materialist idea. But for Žižek, the subject isn't out here gazing upon reality and never actually being able to access it because it only has access to its phenomenal experience. But actually, the subject is within reality itself. The subject is within the world of objects, and it is, in a certain sense, an object itself. The subject is objet A. Now, objet A isn't an object like a tree or a rock, but it is the objectified form of nothingness. It is a positivization of the negativity of the subject. I have another video talking about this, so I'm not going to talk about it here. But basically, for Žižek, there is the subject, and the subject is inscribed into reality in the form of the objet A. And precisely because it is inscribed into reality, it can't step back and gaze upon it as it objectively is. The example he uses is, or the analogy he uses is that of class struggle from a Marxist perspective. It is impossible to talk about class struggle objectively or neutrally because you're always doing so from the perspective of whatever class you're in. So that's what Žižek means by there being no meta-language. Any perspective on reality is always already one-sided because it is inscribed into reality at a certain point and in a certain position. And that's the problem with not the problem necessarily, but that's the consequence of immanence. I also have a video on immanence where I talk about how the subject isn't transcendent from reality. The subject is immanently inscribed into reality, and it's precisely because it's immanently inscribed into reality that it cannot have an objective perspective of reality as it is in itself. But what Žižek says it is the in itself is the real is precisely the subject itself. So what escapes the transcendental correlation, right? What escapes the circle of subjective experience are whether that be the Kantian phenomenal horizon of representation, or whether that be language itself. What escapes both of these horizons of experience, what escapes all forms of the transcendental correlational circle, is the subject itself as the objet A, because the subject cannot be located in reality, because in order to do that, the subject would have to step back behind itself. Another video I have on this topic is consciousness is unconscious. You cannot be conscious of, the subject cannot be conscious of itself because it is the point from which consciousness occurs, from which any vision of reality occurs. So if it were to be conscious of itself, it would literally have to step on its own shoulders and perform this impossible move, analogous to an eyeball being able to somehow stare at itself. It's impossible. So it's the same thing with the subject. It's precisely because the subject is inscribed into reality that it cannot locate itself in reality. So this is what Žižek means when he talks about the gap or the void in reality. That void is the subject itself. It's a subject that cannot be located in objective reality. So now you see how this relates to Norm's reply to Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil is actually presupposing a non-materialist understanding of subjectivity. He's presupposing that he can just step back from the universe and just say objectively, oh, the universe has no meaning and it doesn't care for you. But he isn't realizing here that we're not separate from the universe. We're not some extra layer of spiritual reality. That would be a non-materialist idea. No, we are inscribed into reality. We are immanently inscribed into reality, so that we could never be able to step back and speak about it in the way that Neil deGrasse Tyson thinks he can in that tweet. So another Žižek quote, he says, "This is why it is not enough to insist on the non-transparency of objects, on how objects have a hidden core withdrawn from human reach. What is withdrawn is not just the hidden side of objects, but above all, the true dimension of the subject's activity. The true excess is not the excess of objectivity which eludes the subject's grasp, but the excess of the subject itself. That is to say, what eludes the subject is the blind spot, the point at which it is itself inscribed into reality." So the subject itself, as it is inscribed into the world of objects in the form of objet A, This is precisely what cannot be located within our representation. This is what cannot be brought into the transcendental correlational circle. And this is how Žižek undermines this circle. This is how he gets around perhaps what is the central problem of modern philosophy, which is the problem of how do we access objective reality. Ever since Kant, at least, this has been probably the main issue of philosophy. It's how do we escape our subjective experience and attain to a grasping of objective reality. And for Žižek, it's just to say that there is an element that cannot be reduced to subjective experience. There is an element which we can understand and grasp philosophically. That element cannot be located within the transcendental circle, and it itself is objectively real. It is the real. And what that real is we ourselves. We as subjects escape any sort of closure of the transcendental field, and that is why we are objective. We are the real. The subject itself is the real. So Žižek would agree with Norm that we are not superior to the universe, but we are merely a fraction of it.
Neil, there is a logic flaw in your little aphorism that seems quite telling. Since you and I are part of the universe, then we would also be indifferent and uncaring. Perhaps you forgot, Neil, that we are not superior to the universe, but merely a fraction of it. Nice day indeed.